The old man sat quietly in the witness chair, his worn suit pressed but threadbare at the elbows. Pinned to his chest, just above his heart, was a single medal, a purple ribbon with a gold border, bearing the profile of George Washington. Judge Richard Blackwood glanced at it with barely concealed contempt and said the words that would end his judicial career. "Remove that fake cheap medal before you insult this court further." What happened in the next 10 minutes would remind an entire courtroom that some medals aren't just decorations. They're paid for in blood. The Riverside County Superior Court was hearing a property dispute case that should have been routine. Harold Chen, age 71, was testifying as a character witness for his neighbor in a boundary disagreement. He'd been called to establish that his neighbor was an honest, trustworthy person who wouldn't deliberately encroach on someone else's land. But what was truly shocking was what that fake, cheap medal actually represented. Judge Blackwood had a reputation. At 52, he'd been on the bench for 12 years and had built his career on being tough on nonsense, as he called it. Others called it being dismissive, arrogant, and occasionally cruel. He particularly had little patience for what he viewed as theatrics, including veterans who wore their medals to court. "Your Honor," Harold began, "I've known my neighbor for 15 years, and I can attest that—" "Stop," Judge Blackwood interrupted, staring at the Purple Heart on Harold's chest. "Is that supposed to impress this court? A piece of costume jewelry?" Harold's attorney, Sarah Martinez, stood immediately. "Your Honor, that's inappropriate. Mr. Chen is a decorated veteran and has every right." "I'll decide what's appropriate in my courtroom, Counselor," Blackwood snapped. He turned his attention back to Harold. "Sir, I've seen plenty of stolen valor cases. I've seen men wear medals they bought at flea markets, pretending to be heroes. That cheap piece of metal looks exactly like something from a costume shop." The courtroom went silent. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Harold's voice remained calm. "Your Honor, this medal was awarded to me in 1969 for wounds received in combat." "Sure it was," Blackwood said with undisguised sarcasm. "And I'm sure you have all the documentation to prove it, which you conveniently forgot to bring today. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet." Because what Judge Blackwood didn't know was that someone in the back of the courtroom had just pulled out their phone. Sarah Martinez's face had gone red. "Your Honor, this is completely out of line. Mr. Chen's military service has nothing to do with this case. He's here as a character witness, and you're attacking his—" "I'm attacking nothing," Blackwood interrupted. "I'm maintaining the dignity of this court. And I won't have it turned into a circus by someone wearing fake medals. Sir, remove that piece of junk or I'll hold you in contempt." Harold slowly reached up toward the Purple Heart, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from barely controlled emotion. "Your Honor," Harold said quietly, "this medal was pinned to my chest by President Nixon in 1970. It represents wounds I received when my helicopter was shot down over Laos during a classified rescue mission. I was the only survivor." "Oh, a classified mission," Blackwood said mockingly. "How convenient. No records, no proof, just your word and that cheap medal." "Sir, for the last time." The courtroom doors burst open. A man in full Marine Corps dress blues strode in with the kind of authority that made everyone instinctively straighten. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair, a chest full of ribbons, and 3 stars on each shoulder. Lieutenant General Marcus Reeves, USMC. Behind him came 2 more Marines in dress uniform, moving with crisp precision. But this was exactly when everything changed. Because General Reeves had been sitting in his car outside the courthouse, monitoring the proceedings via phone, waiting for his turn to testify in a completely different case. "Court will come to order," the bailiff announced, though no one had been speaking. The entire room was frozen, watching the general march down the center aisle. Judge Blackwood's face went from red to pale. "General, this is highly irregular. Court is in session." "I'm aware," General Reeves said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "I was waiting outside for my case to be called when I received a phone call about what's happening in this courtroom." He gestured to someone in the gallery, a young woman with her phone still in her hand. She'd been streaming the proceedings to her father, a retired Marine, who had immediately called General Reeves. The general stopped directly in front of Harold, who remained seated in the witness chair. For a long moment, the two men looked at each other. Then, General Reeves came to attention and rendered the sharpest, most perfect salute Harold had ever seen. "Gunnery Sergeant Chen," the general said formally. "It's an honor, sir." Harold slowly stood and returned the salute. "The honor is mine, General." Judge Blackwood looked between them, confusion replacing his earlier arrogance. Would someone explain what's happening here? What you're seeing now is nothing, because General Reeves was about to reveal something that would destroy Judge Blackwood's career. General Reeves turned to face the judge, and every person in that courtroom could see the barely controlled fury in his eyes. "Your Honor, you just called a United States Marine's Purple Heart fake cheap medal. You accused a decorated combat veteran of stolen valor in open court, and you ordered him to remove a medal that was earned through blood and sacrifice." The general pulled out his phone and held it up. "This has been streaming live to the Marine Corps social media network for the past 5 minutes. Thousands of Marines are watching this right now." Blackwood's face had gone from pale to gray. "Allow me to educate you, Your Honor," Reeves continued, his voice cold as ice. "Gunnery Sergeant Harold Chen served 2 tours in Vietnam with Marine Medium Helicopter Squadron 364. On April 15, 1969, his CH-46 was shot down during a classified rescue operation in Laos, an operation that officially never happened." He stepped closer to the bench. The helicopter was carrying 12 Marines and 2 rescued POWs. It was hit by enemy fire and went down in hostile territory. Of the 14 men aboard, only 1 survived long enough to be rescued 3 days later. The general gestured to Harold. "This man, Gunnery Sergeant Chen. He was found with 3 bullet wounds, a shattered leg, and burns covering 40% of his body. He'd kept himself alive for 72 hours in enemy territory, hiding in a river and evading NVA patrols. When they finally extracted him, his body temperature was so low they didn't think he'd survive the flight." The courtroom was dead silent. "The Purple Heart he wears," Reeves continued, "was one of 3 awarded to him. The other 2 are in a display case at his home. This one, which you called fake cheap metal, represents wounds that left him with permanent nerve damage, chronic pain, and PTSD that he's managed for 54 years. The truth was, Harold hadn't told anyone in the courtroom the most horrifying part of his survival story." General Reeves pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I took the liberty of printing Gunnery Sergeant Chen's service record. Would the court like to see it?" Before Blackwood could respond, the general continued, "2 Purple Hearts, 1 Silver Star, 1 Bronze Star with V device for valor, and a Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for combat valor. The Navy Cross was awarded for his actions after the helicopter was shot down." He opened the folder and read, "Despite being severely wounded, Gunnery Sergeant Chen spent 6 hours moving through the wreckage, attempting to save his fellow Marines. He pulled 4 wounded men from the burning helicopter before enemy fire drove him back. He held security over his fallen comrades for another 4 hours before he was forced to retreat to avoid capture. For 3 days, he evaded enemy patrols while suffering from blood loss, infection, and exposure. Sarah Martinez had tears streaming down her face. Harold stood perfectly still, his jaw clenched. The mission was classified for 35 years, Reeves said. When the records were finally declassified in 2004, Gunnery Sergeant Chen was invited to the White House to meet the families of the POWs he helped rescue. He declined. "Do you know why, Your Honor?" Blackwood couldn't speak. "Because he said he was just doing his job. Because despite being one of the most decorated Marines of the Vietnam War, he spent 50 years living quietly, never seeking recognition, never demanding respect. He wore that Purple Heart today not to impress your court, but because it's the only piece of his service he still carries with him. The other medals are in storage. But this one," Reeves gestured to the Purple Heart, "represents his brothers who didn't come home. He wears it for them." Actually, Judge Blackwood hadn't learned his biggest lesson yet, because what General Reeves was about to reveal would end more than just this hearing. The general turned back to Judge Blackwood. "Your Honor, I've been a Marine for 38 years. I've served in 3 wars. I've commanded thousands of Marines in combat. And in all that time, I have never witnessed such disrespectful, ignorant, and callous treatment of a decorated veteran." He pulled out another document. "This is a formal complaint I'm filing with the California Judicial Performance Commission. As of this moment, your conduct is under official investigation." The courtroom doors opened again. This time, a woman in a business suit entered. Anna Morrison, Commissioner for the State Judicial Performance Commission. She'd been in the courthouse for another matter and had been called immediately when the live stream started. "Your Honor," Commissioner Morrison said formally, "these proceedings are suspended pending investigation. You're ordered to surrender your gavel and vacate the bench immediately." Blackwood found his voice, though it came out as a whisper. I didn't mean. I was just trying to maintain." "You were trying to humiliate a war hero," General Reeves cut him off, "and you succeeded. But not in the way you intended." Harold finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Your Honor, I didn't come here today to cause trouble. I came to help my neighbor. That's all I wanted to do." "I know, Gunny," the general said gently. "And you did nothing wrong. This is on him." But the most shocking revelation was still coming. As Judge Blackwood stood to leave the bench, his hands shaking, another figure rose from the gallery. An elderly man, probably in his 80s, wearing a simple suit with a single ribbon bar on his lapel, the light blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor. "If I may address the court," the old man said in a voice that, while aged, still carried authority. Commissioner Morrison nodded. "Please. My name is James Patterson, retired Marine, Sergeant Major. I was the crew chief on the rescue helicopter that extracted Gunnery Sergeant Chen in 1969. Harold's eyes widened. He hadn't seen Patterson in over 40 years. Patterson continued, "I want this court to know what we found when we reached him. 3 days in a river, trying to stay hidden, nearly dead from his wounds. But he'd used his belt as a tourniquet on another Marine before he'd escaped. A Marine we found dead near the crash site. Even dying himself, he tried to save his brothers." The old Marine's voice thickened with emotion. "I helped load him onto my helicopter. I held pressure on his wounds during the flight. I watched the docs work on him for 6 hours at the field hospital. I've seen a lot of heroes in my time, but Gunnery Sergeant Chen is the toughest Marine I ever met. He turned to face Blackwood directly. And you called his Purple Heart fake cheap metal. You called his sacrifice a costume. Your Honor, you're not fit to sit on that bench. You're not fit to judge these people. And you're damn sure not fit to speak Gunnery Sergeant Chen's name. The bailiff didn't even try to control the spontaneous applause that erupted in the courtroom. The fallout was swift and absolute. By that evening, the video had gone viral. Major news networks picked up the story. Judge humiliates decorated Marine veteran, career over. The legal community responded with unanimous condemnation. The California Bar Association launched its own ethics investigation. Within 3 days, Judge Richard Blackwood had resigned. The alternative was a public hearing that would have been even more humiliating. His resignation letter, released to the press, was brief. I made a terrible error in judgment that I deeply regret. I'm stepping down effective immediately. But the story wasn't about Blackwood's fall. It became about Harold Chen. News outlets dug into his records. They found the declassified reports of his rescue mission. They interviewed the families of the POWs he'd helped save. They discovered that Harold had spent 50 years as a high school teacher, never once mentioning his military service to his students. He'd lived in the same modest house for 40 years, drove a 15-year-old car, and volunteered at the VA hospital every Sunday. When reporters tried to interview him, Harold declined. I was just doing my job, he said simply. The real heroes didn't come home. General Reeves had a different perspective. In a widely shared interview, he said, "What happened in that courtroom was a teaching moment. Not just about respecting veterans, but about not judging people by appearances." Gunnery Sergeant Chen wore a worn suit and an old medal. Judge Blackwood saw cheap metal. The truth is, that medal represents the highest price anyone can pay in service to their country. And Harold Chen paid that price, survived it, and has lived with it every day for 54 years. The Purple Heart Foundation reached out to Harold and asked if they could feature his story in their educational materials. He agreed, but only on one condition. Tell the stories of the men who died in that helicopter. They deserve to be remembered. The Marine Corps created a new training program for recruiters and public affairs officers called Operation Recognition. It taught service members how to identify and properly honor decorated veterans, using Harold's case as the cautionary example of what happens when respect is forgotten. Sarah Martinez, Harold's attorney in the original case, waived her fees entirely. It was an honor just to stand in the same room with him, she said. 6 months later, Harold was invited to speak at the Naval Academy. He didn't want to go, but General Reeves personally asked him, and Harold couldn't refuse a general. Standing before 800 midshipmen, Harold spoke for 15 minutes about his service, his survival, and the brothers he lost. But his final words resonated most. That judge called my Purple Heart fake, cheap metal. He was wrong about it being fake, but maybe he was partially right about one thing. It's not the metal that matters. What matters is what it represents. Every veteran wearing a Purple Heart paid for it in blood. Some paid more than others. I survived to wear mine. 13 of my brothers didn't get that chance. So when you see a veteran wearing their medals, don't just see metal. See sacrifice. See service. See someone who answered their country's call and paid a price most of us can't imagine. The midshipmen gave him a 5-minute standing ovation. Harold Chen passed away in 2024 at age 76. His funeral was attended by over 500 Marines, from privates to generals. General Reeves delivered the eulogy. Sergeant Major Patterson, now 88, was there, along with the families of the POWs Harold had helped rescue 55 years earlier. His Purple Heart, the one Judge Blackwood had called fake cheap metal, was placed on his casket alongside his other medals. But according to his wishes, after the funeral, all his medals were donated to the National Museum of the Marine Corps, where they're displayed with a simple plaque. Gunnery Sergeant Harold Chen, USMC. These medals were earned in combat and worn with humility. They represent not one man's courage, but the sacrifice of all those who serve. Judge them not by their appearance, but by what they mean. And in California judicial chambers, Harold's case is now used in mandatory ethics training for all new judges. The lesson is simple. Respect is earned, yes, but some people have already earned it in ways most of us will never comprehend. And calling a Purple Heart fake cheap metal isn't just disrespectful. It's a betrayal of everything that metal represents. Judge Blackwood was never heard from again. His name became synonymous with judicial misconduct and veteran disrespect. But Harold Chen's name became synonymous with something else: quiet heroism, lasting sacrifice, and the reminder that the most decorated warriors are often the ones who speak the least about their service. The cheap metal he wore on his chest wasn't fake. It was forged in fire, bought with blood, and honored by those who understood what it truly meant.